Okay, so we're going to get going. Today is March 16th. It's 5:30 p.m. and this is the North Kingstown DEI Subcommittee meeting. So I'm going to start with the roll call. If you guys can just unmute yourself and just let me know if you're here once I say your name. David Williams. Here. Here. Kimberly Johnson-Smith.
I'm here.
Angela Boyce-Claire.
Here.
Sherry Gagnon.
Here.
Shivali Finkelstein.
Here.
Emma Rial. Katie Gabrielle Black.
Here.
Marissa Eisner.
Here.
Melissa Kamba-Kelsey.
Here.
Chloe Diehouse.
Here.
Dave Aubin. Here. Alexis Rohrbeck.
Here.
Jen Lima. Jen, I know you're on. I'm not hearing you on our end though, Jen. Let me see. I'm going to ask you to unmute because I see that you're on here twice, and one of them looks like it's muted. Okay, Jen's here, so she can at least type. Perfect. Thanks, Jen. Jake Mather.
Oh, Brian, can you hear me now?
Yes, we got you. Yes, you're good now.
Okay. Sorry, I am here. I've been here kind of. Apologize again. If this happens again, I'm just going to drop out and let you guys handle it. To go back real quick to what Jake said, I just said that it was not me who sent the email, in case anybody was wondering. I just wanted to put that out there. And I appreciate him addressing it, but he is all good as far as I'm concerned too, but I appreciate that.
Sorry, Jake, did you say here? I know you're here.
I am here, yes.
Thank you. Denise Manseri. And I'm Brian Lally, and I am here as well. Okay, so that takes care of the roll. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of last month's meeting minutes from February 16th. I'm assuming everybody from the subcommittee was able to review those meeting minutes. Do we have any discussion about those minutes? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from February 16th? Kimberly, I see Kimberly first, and Dave, was that a second?
Sure.
Thank you, and all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, and those meeting minutes pass unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, so the next one is item number 3 on the agenda, review proposals for the DEI Community Assessment Equity Audit at the request of the full school committee for purposes of amending the phases. And we did add in there, a possible vote on forwarding recommendations to the school committee, depending on kind of where we land tonight. We wanted to include that in the agenda just in case we do get to a point where we can do that. Kimberly, I see, sorry, real quick. Regarding the calendar, was a survey ever sent to families from the district? I think that was included on the minutes.
It was, but they opted not to add a comment about religious holidays like we had requested.
Okay. Thanks, Jen. Okay. So I don't know, I hope everyone was able to view the school committee meeting. If you weren't able to attend live or Zoom in, at least sort of see what the discussion was. And basically they kind of voted to send it back to us, just like the agenda item says, so we can kind of work on it. Jen, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more to what happened at the last school committee meeting and kind of what our role is now, kind of moving forward with this.
Sure. So for anybody who didn't have the opportunity to watch the school committee meeting, it was sent back to us because mainly because the concern is over twofold, over the cost of the audit and over whether or not we need to have all the phases done, and whether there is any of it that we can do ourselves. And those are all issues that we had touched upon in the subcommittee meeting. So the school committee is looking for us to renegotiate the proposals, which if we go back to one company, we have to go back to both, and that's part of the bidding process. But also to look to see, do we need to have all the phases? Is there anything that we can do ourselves? And then kind of go from there. We have sent a note to both vendors, but the other issue that had come up was the timing. The timing in the proposals had, based on them starting to work with us in January or February. So we wanted to find out, how this delay would affect the proposal. Does it affect it, and does it affect the cost? And the answer that we got back from both companies was pretty much they will start whenever we want to. Their preference would be to start the work over the summer so that things can be implemented in September. And as far as affecting the price, the answer is no, the delay doesn't affect it. The only thing that would affect it would be changing the phases, which is kind of where we're at now, to kind of talk amongst ourselves and see what our thoughts are on that. So I know, Katie had brought up at the meeting and in the subcommittee meeting as well, and again, this is one of the things that we had touched on, was curriculum. Is curriculum something that we need to be looking at right now? Is the data review? One thing that I feel is non-negotiable are focus groups. I think whatever we decide to go forward with, having those focus groups done by an outside party will be really important to get information that hard data can't give us. But I don't know what everybody else's thoughts are.
I completely agree with you, Jen, on the focus groups. I think that's, incredibly important for an outside vendor to do that. The curriculum review is short of the project launch and the final report recommendations roadmap. That curriculum review is the second highest budget line item of $10,000 or $10,250, which, again, and we spoke about this last time. I'm also looking for the curriculum review portion of insights, but I think it was right around in that ballpark as well. It does make sense to me that that could be an area where we can shave off a little bit, or reduce or eliminate that scope, given that we do have a fairly brand new curriculum. But anyways, that's my opinion.
Just one thing on that curriculum, it is only new, I believe, one of the administrators or teachers, correct me, I believe the English language curriculum is new only at elementary and middle school level. I don't think it's been touched at the high school yet.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the surveys and focus groups for both of the companies were involved in phase one. I definitely think that is something that we should look to include in whatever proposal we send to the school committee. I also thought, and I think it's phase 8 in both of them. Yeah, that's family and community engagement practices. I personally, I'd like to see that stay in there. I think that would give us a lot of valuable information and feedback that, depending on the results of that, this committee could kind of look at and, kind of decide where we want to go with that and if there's improvements that we can make. I know one of our agenda items later on tonight is talking about recruiting, BIPOC educators for, open positions that we have. There's also that workplace diversity strategies phase in both proposals. I'd be interested to, see that one and maybe get, some more information or at least look at that as something that we try to keep in there as well. And it's interesting. I know that PCG was overall the more expensive one, but when you start breaking down some of these phases, for instance, phase 1 for PCG is actually less expensive by about $1,700 than Insight. So, in thinking about the cost, and I know that was a concern of the school committee, we might be able to sort of not only reduce the cost, but continue to stay with the company that we all felt would be the best. Sort of kill two birds with one stone there. So just my input. Dave, I think you had your hand up too.
Yeah, and sorry, this is backing up a bit, but so I know at the committee meeting there was a lot of comments made, but one that I thought was interesting, and I just wanted to see what others felt, is there was a comment about there being a potential conflict of interest with the same group that's doing the auditing, also offering sort of like services to address any issues that may arise. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it's sort of like, we have a group coming in saying, these are all the things you need to get done. Oh, and by the way, we offer those services. And I just thought that was an interesting comment. I don't know a lot about it. It also made me wonder whether this group or other groups, or these two groups or other groups like them that we're considering, ever come back with a report that says, actually, you guys look good, or do they always come back and say, no, there's these litany of things that you need to address, and oh, by the way, we offer these services. I just thought that was an interesting comment, and I wanted to hear what other people's thoughts were.
So just to speak to that quickly, because I know that there were a few public comments related to that, even if these companies offered services to address, whatever deficits they might find through this audit, we wouldn't be able to move forward with anything. And anything that we might want to do, whether it's with this company or on our own or someone else, we would have to sort of propose to the school committee. So, I look at this process as very sort of step by step. This is step one, figuring out kind of what we don't know. I look at it as us taking the information that we get from this audit, depending on whatever phases we decide to move forward with, and then us as the subcommittee figuring out how to act on those and figuring out where to go from there. And, that could be looking at outside resources, that could be looking at what we have in the district, but, it sounded like the people that made those comments at the last school committee meeting sort of thought, if we decide to go with PCG and they say that we have some deficits in these areas and they offer solutions, that that would be a done deal, and we would just move forward with that. But that's really just not how any of this process works. I agree, Dave. I thought those were interesting comments, but I think maybe some people not understanding the process and necessarily the role of this subcommittee too. And for people that have their hand up, you guys can unmute freely. I think you're able to, so don't feel like I see Dave and Chloe with their hands up. Whoever wants to go.
Chloe, you go first.
Oh, okay. I thought you were like ahead of me in line. Sorry. I hope this is relevant. I just was thinking about the curriculum review, and I was wondering, I'm not like super familiar with what has been done in recent years with the curriculum that's not yet been like implemented. So apologies if what I'm saying is now with all the information. Is there any way that we can have like only a partial curriculum review? Because I think there are definitely parts of like the history curriculum that really need to be amended, but I don't know about other parts of the curriculum. Like, is there any way that we could like cut funding by like not doing a full review, but only certain parts that might be more likely to have issues with them, if that makes any sense?
Chloe, just to speak to that, I mean, just going off of Insight's phases in curriculum review is phase 7 for them, and the first bullet does say review selected curricula, so it does sound like it wouldn't be a full curriculum review, and we could probably, if we wanted to go that route, decide which areas we might want to touch upon. So I think the answer, without reaching out to them, it seems like most likely yes.
I was wondering about the staff readiness and the am I echoing? the staff readiness and the leadership readiness portion. It's about 9,750. I'm sorry, my dog's coming in. Really go. Excuse me. About 9,750, and it kind of seems to me as though we have the school committee has decided that the DEI subcommittee is valuable, and the superintendent decided that it was a valuable thing, and our voices are heard. So it seems like the leadership is there to take something like this on. Like, we know this is something we want to do, and the superintendent and the administration and the school committee, I mean, they're our boss. If they tell the staff what to do with curriculum and things like that, or in our classrooms and for PD and stuff like that, I mean, we have to do it. We have some choice in what we do, but most of those are directives that come down to our level. So I'm wondering if the full investigation of staff readiness and administrative readiness needs to be expended. I know there was a reason I wrote down why it should stay in last meeting, but I don't have my notes with me.
Dave, I also had a star on that one, but also I didn't I didn't make a note as to what that star meant, so I'm not sure where my thoughts were on it. But I think it was, the essentially the three that I had circled as the most important were the phase 1 survey, the phase 6 workforce diversity. Oh wait, yes, and strategies, and then the phase 8 and community engagement practices. And I think the ones that I had stars on, perhaps those are the ones that I was thinking. I actually know that they are the ones that I was thinking that maybe reduce or eliminate, and that would be the one that you just mentioned, as well as the curriculum review and potentially stated as student data review, or at least the collection part of the student data, because I think there's quite a bit of student data available, and I'm not sure and I don't remember if I spoke to this last time, if the collection portion of that is significant in the review portion, or vice versa, because if we have the data and we're just literally handing it to them, collection is probably really but I just like to get a better understanding of how that's broken out, and maybe I'm just not, I haven't, yeah, anyways.
Molly, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, can you hear me? So I was just wondering, given everything that's going on, I think like everyone right now is going through a lot, right? So we can agree with that our district is kind of going through a lot of things right now. And that kind of does put a level of toll on the staff and everyone else. So I'm just wondering, given where we are right now, would it be something that this committee would consider having our school sit teams, and this committee kind of takes all the data that has been provided to our school, namely we have the XQ data, we have the survey works, we have testing data, we have achievement data. RIDE actually just released a really great portal that houses a lot more data than we had access to. And I'm just wondering, given everything else that's going on, would it make sense with the remaining amount of time we have left for the year that this committee comes up with some focused questions on this data and then reaches out to the principals to say, hey, we would like your SIT teams to look at the same data that we are all looking at, and then we can compare to see what everyone is seeing in there and what they are finding, to kind of maybe this committee recommend some very specific things that we would want to study more about. as opposed to kind of like going this full direction, which seems to be, kind of controversial right now. I'm just wondering. I'm trying to think of ways how we can move forward with everything else going on in the district, with this audit and everything else. Just trying to think like how can we move forward and do things internally, at least start to do things internally. We have a lot of data on our hands and we have SIT teams that I'm not sure if all the SIT teams already have created their goals, but if they're willing to spend some time looking at some focus questions that maybe this committee sends to them, then we can have some internal information from all the different schools to say, okay, here's what we're seeing. And then I don't know if, compare everyone's findings and come up with 2 or 3 things, like things to focus on that we want to learn more about. I don't know.
I think that's a really good idea. Thank you, Shivali, for bringing that up, because that is something that we do have a tremendous amount of, and it's sort of what I was getting at before. And we've got data, we've got tons and tons of data, and to not try to do something at least preliminarily with that and come up with some conclusions and some questions and start to understand it a little bit more. That it seems like a critical first step.
I also agree that there's definitely data within our district that we can review. I do have some concerns about our ability to manage it in a timely manner, and also about, I think, the importance of having an outside person evaluate not just numbers, but the unquantifiable stuff within our district. But I certainly have no issue with doing a first pass review of information to see if we can focus areas that we'd like to dive into further.
So I don't know what that means. And also in that likelihood.
I'm sorry, Jake.
What, Jen?
I had actually started this weekend to kind of pull together like places to kind of put together like some goals for this group about like things to look at, places to get data from and things like that. That I was going to present for the next agenda to be reviewed. But I guess I would be curious to hear from other members of the subcommittee on what their thoughts are and what they think is the best way to proceed from here.
To me, it seems like a critical issue is how the outcomes are perceived, whether it's something that's done internally versus externally. So this is one of those main issues that keeps coming up. That an audit internally. Oh, sorry. It sounds like someone else is talking.
I think that was background noise on Jen's phone, Dave.
So okay. So I was just saying, I think, this idea of, at the end of the day, whether we look at things internally or we get an external audit, perhaps we could certainly do both, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. Whatever conclusions are drawn from those processes, right? How will they be viewed? Will we be more or less likely as a district to follow through with any conclusions, any recommendations, if those conclusions and recommendations come internally versus come externally. Seems like one of the critical issues, in addition to issues around cost and timing and so forth. I don't know the answer to that question, but it seems like until this point, we've been operating under the assumption that in conclusions that are drawn from any sort of an internal process would not be taken as seriously, perhaps, as conclusions that come from an external audit.
I just had another question. What I'm just not as familiar. I don't know if anyone else. What the data that Shivali spoke of, what it actually has, and if we've had it, why it hasn't already been analyzed. So if it's data that we already have, and I don't know the answer to this, I'm asking, like if we have it, it seems like it's data we already have. Has it been analyzed, and how would we look at it differently?
So I can just speak to like a building level. At a building level, like we normally do that. We do that as an internal practice in the buildings, right? So if you go on to the RIDE data portal, there is a lot of public information that's posted, and then there's some additional information that's more sensitive that administrators have access to. So depending on some of and this is just my raw ideas right now, but if this committee comes up with some indicators that they want to look at, the principals can help pull that data, and then there's some public data already available to, like this is how we set our own curriculum internal goals, but this can be more of a district-wide idea. And again, this is very raw, so you may not fully, I may not be fully communicating this really well right now, but my point is that this data that we are talking about would be something that the SIT teams that normally don't do that, or this committee would look at, but they will all look at the same data in their own committees, and then come up with some conclusions that will be shared with us. So we would be looking at the different elementary schools. What was their conclusion when they looked at the same indicators that we looked at for the high school? And then you can look at K through 12. Are there any common patterns that we see within this data that we probably want to learn more about? I don't know if I'm making any sense. But for instance, achievement data. K through 12, students test at every year. They have a standardized testing, right? And I'm saying testing because I live in the teaching and learning world. I know there are other indicators this committee may be interested in, but I look at that data more, so I can speak to that more clearly, give you a better example. But so a first grade RICAS score, achievement score broken down by subgroups. This is what we do at the high school. We look at the SAT data, we look at the PSAT data, and then we look at the subgroups, and we look at what subgroups were underperforming, and we put some plans in place in our curriculum, in our programs to kind of try to address that. So if we did that K through 12 and we were looking at Fishing Cove data analysis on their achievement, comparing it to some other elementary school and compared to middle school and high school, if we look at all that work done, analysis of that work together, like on one wall, if we put their information together, we might see some emerging patterns there that we may want to look into more through this committee. But it would be more different schools, SIT teams are looking at the same thing, but coming up with their patterns based on the data they see. And then this committee can see it K through 12 analysis and kind of come up with some more specific indicators that we want to focus on and we want to improve. And the data that they would look at would be our baseline, and then we go from there. So just, again, very raw thoughts, but I figured it would be a start that we can continue to work on, regardless of what comes off this audit, whether it happens or not. At least we could kind of get the ball going.
I think that's a really great point, rather than the 14 or 15 of us analyzing data, which we're not data analyzers. I'm not. I don't know. Maybe the rest of you guys are. Is having the individual sit teams review that data and come up with their own conclusions, and then all come together and review the conclusions together makes way more sense, and it's much less daunting, because I wouldn't know how to start analyzing data myself. And also, based on sort of the timing of this, and at least I think it was, I forget which company said that it might make sense to hold off and start in, I think maybe it was Insight, start in September. I'm just looking back at the notes, or July to August. We may have some time between now and then to do this preliminary data collection and data review and sort of analysis, and then maybe refine these proposals a little bit based on that. And essentially, we may still be able to start in the same, if we do both, on the same time frame.
So I guess my question, are we thinking in terms of this sort of internal data collection, review, utilizing SIT teams, would that be sort of in lieu of the equity audit that we receive the RFPs for, or doing that first and then sort of moving into the equity audit from there? I'm just not sure what people are thinking. Or are we talking about, rather than having the equity audit do, some sort of student data review, us doing it internally and not including that phase?
That's sort of the question that I was trying to get to the bottom of as well, Brian. I think the internal data collection and review could be a really good first step that might help us focus a little bit more on what we actually need, and with the understanding that these proposals were a response to a very, very specific RFP that we gave them. So they can be that, potentially that RFP can be modified a little bit, or at least, the RFP has already gone out, but the proposals themselves could, maybe we could use that as the step one, the data collection, the SIT teams coming together as a step one that will help inform how we move forward with the audit. Because I do think there's huge value in moving forward with the audit, both from what David said as sort of an outside perspective and an outside voice and outside recommendations. I don't want to downplay the value of the audit. I just thought that maybe the data collection could be a step one.
Are there aspects of the proposed audits that we can look at and say, yeah, we're probably not going to get that with the internal data? I'm with Sherry. I sort of, I'm getting some vague notion of the data we have available to us, but it's hard to know. So, but are there aspects of the proposals, the external audit proposals, that we look at and we say, yeah, we're really not going to, either we're not going to get that with the data we have, or we don't have the expertise in-house to do those things, like, for example, focus groups, we're not set up to do that, such that we can say, hey, one way to address what was discussed at the school committee is we cut these aspects from the external audit proposal because we think we can address those in some part with our internal data. But there's these other aspects of the external audit proposals that let's just go ahead and move forward with, because we're not going to hit those things with what we have.
That's a really good point. I don't know, maybe Shivali can speak a little bit more about what data there is. Like, I don't know what data we're actually collecting to be able to answer what we then need to go and ask these companies for and to do.
I think the point just made was really good. I think we can go through everything they do and start to align what data we have available that can be done internally right now, and then the ones that we can't get because we don't have, and the focus groups and such. So I think if we start with what the audit offers and go through each category and identify what data we have already that could be available, and maybe if there is a way to include feedback from each of the SIT teams on those categories. So basically saying to the SIT team members for each school, if you were tasked this indicator, what kind of data would you look at? Let's say you didn't have the external source and you had to look at it internally for each of those indicators that the audit says they will do. What if you had to do it on your own, what data would you look at? Because I can answer some of those for the high school by just looking at it. If I didn't have the privilege of getting the audit and I had to do it myself, I would start thinking, what data would I look at? I don't know if that's a good first start. What if we started just that?
I wonder if that would result in getting unbalanced data, if we would get one school doing it one way, one school doing it another. I think it should all be looked at from the same point of view, with the same direction. And I adore my colleagues and I think so highly of them, but I wonder if we have the expertise to do this as well. I know it's different in different buildings, but I know I certainly couldn't do it.
So Shivali, as a quick follow-up, and are you asking for the SIT teams? Hold on a second. I just formulate my thought for 2 seconds. Are you asking for input into what data they would like, or input into the data that's available? Maybe I don't understand what you said. What you said. Do you mind?
Yeah, Jake, I meant what data they would. So in each of the category of the audit that the company would do for us, right? So they would request data from us too. That's how they are going to be able to answer some of their own indicator questions. I meant what you said latter, which is we would ask the SIT committees to say, if you were to collect information on this particular indicator that we were going to outsource, but let's say we don't have the ability to outsource, and if we asked you to collect information on a category, what data do you have available that you would look at? And so see, achievement is really easy to speak because it's so clear, but let's say we were looking at the achievement data for equity purposes, I would immediately look at test scores, and I would look at that is available to us for all grade levels. So there is no one lens versus the other. It's a black and white achievement data broken down by subgroups. We would have to say to them, we would like you to look at the achievement data for your students. We would like you to look at the standardized test scores. We would like you to look at the diagnostic testing that you do in your schools, and we would like you to break it down by subgroups and give us some conclusions on what you see in that data. So that's pretty clear. K through 12, everybody's achievement data analysis will kind of sort of tell a story. So it may say a certain subgroup, we are losing a certain subgroup after 4th grade. Again, I'm just making this up, but something that's specific. And then we could, and that those findings could come from everybody's pattern of what they submit to us. So this committee would look at everybody, right? So they would look at middle school, elementary school analysis, high school, and try to see if there is a pattern. Other indicators might be not so clear as achievement data, but does that make sense? What I'm trying to say, like what would be the data you would look at? And the reason I say that is then I can be sure that elementary schools are not completely looking at that one indicator with a complete different lens than the middle schools.
Yeah, so we're asking what data they would want. We're not necessarily asking them for the data. So we want to know what data they want so that we can assess whether or not we have it, so that we can assess whether or not we ask Insight or Public Consulting Group to collect it.
Correct.
Is that right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense.
There you go.
Shivali or maybe Brian, how much data does the school already, or does the North Kingstown School District already have on workforce diversity, and not just race either, but other indicators of diversity? Is there access to that kind of thing?
We have some internal data, and I could probably run a report, but that would probably be more related to race. I can look into that and report back at our next meeting, but beyond race and ethnicity data, I'm not quite sure what else we collect in terms of the workforce, our teachers and TAs and, between the teachers union and ESP union.
Brian, can I just interject with that for a second? I mean, the reality is we're pretty much white. If you want to look at the diversity, I mean, I would be considered diverse, and that's just because I'm Jewish. There's in this district, it is abundantly clear that is not there. So I don't think there's much to really look towards into that. There may be about socio and economic upbringings that people would be willing to volunteer that information to see where they came from. That may be a component, how hard they worked to get to the place that they are now. But if you look at us as a district there, at least with staff and faculty and administration, there's no diversity.
And the other information, Marissa, that you just alluded to is not probably information that's collected nor can be collected on staff and faculty and administration.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a report that I had to submit sometime back in the fall. I think, we were able to provide race, ethnicity data, and gender data, but beyond that on our staff, and yeah, kind of like Jake said, just because that's typically not anything else that we would collect, socioeconomic status, disability, anything like that.
Do you have that data over a period of maybe 5 to 10 years though? Like, I'd be interested to know if we're losing certain groups of people or gaining them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can go back, because that is information that we have to submit. I think it's every 2 years. We have to sort of do an upload of our demographic information from our staff. So what I can do is I'll try to find as much information as I can, going back at least 5 years and see whatever I can. And I can bring that to our next meeting, and that might be something that we can kind of look at and see if that drives us in a certain direction.
You got that. I'm sure that's happened. You got a target on your back. I get it. So do I. I don't go out, as publicly as you do, because that's not the rule.
So in terms of just the agenda item that we're on, I obviously don't think that we're going to be making any votes on a recommendation for the school committee, but do we have an idea, or I don't know if there's a proposal that needs to be made, or sort of where we go from here? I know we've sort of circled around the idea of kind of gathering internal data and possibly utilizing sit teams at schools. I don't know if somebody has sort of a formulated plan for that, or a recommendation that we can make to this committee to vote on, or if that's maybe just something that we want to investigate further and talk about at our next meeting as well.
That's a good point, Brian. I don't know who and what members of this subcommittee here has access to a lot of that data. So I'm not sure how we would even go about starting that. But that's a good point. Like, where do we go from here?
It seems to me like there's also on the table maybe still the issue of do we move forward now, or at least make a recommendation to move forward now with certain aspects of the external audit, or do we not? Are we just saying like, nope, we're going to sit tight now until we get the ball rolling with the internal process? I personally would not be in favor of that. I personally would be in favor of looking at the proposal and seeing what aspects of it, like for example, the focus groups that we are going to want at some point. We're going to want at some point, and that we should just move forward with. That's how I feel. I don't know if others agree, but it seems like that's a decision that needs to be made. Like, are we putting off the external audit, or are we moving forward with certain parts of it?
I guess I don't know if this is a suggestion or question, but is it possible to, if we have to go back to both groups, to possibly amend the phases or renegotiate essentially what they're offering, right? I mean, could it be as simple as saying, like, these are the concerns brought up by the community, by the school committee, what can you do? And to the points made earlier, you know, if we were to collect certain information internally, what might be helpful to reduce some of those costs? And just asking, is that even an option? Or do we have to be so specific that we're proposing don't do this phase or adjust this phase or do that?
I do think we have to be specific, just because the proposals that they gave to us was a response to our request. So the original request sort of outlined certain things that we were looking for, and that's why, you know, when you look at both proposals, they both have 8 phases. The names of each phase or what they cover are nearly identical. They might have different methods or ideas about how to gather the info and achieve that, but I do think we need to be specific, because I'm not quite sure how the companies would be able to respond, you know, because it's sort of asking them like, hey, what would you cut out? But I think from their perspective, we're sort of driving that. And I think based on the last school committee meeting, that's sort of what they're looking for this committee to do, is to sort of say, hey, if we feel like we don't need all the phases, and the school committee didn't seem willing to go forward with all the phases, regardless of what company, it did seem like, you know, that's our charge is okay, figure out which phases we want to do, talk to both companies, figure out how that might affect pricing, timeline, things like that, and then maybe make a new proposal to the school committee. So a long answer, but the short of it is, yeah, I do think that we need to be specific when we reach out to them. And, you know, Dave, just getting back to what you said, I agree. I don't think we should look to abandon any of this. I think, you know, over the next few meetings, you know, by the end of the school year, I'd like to see us with sort of a firm proposal for the school committee of phases that we all agree on, and, you know, maybe a new pricing after reaching out to them. And, you know, both companies, when we did reach out to them following that school committee meeting, said, you know, the timeline is whenever we want to start. I mean, we can start this summer, we can start it in the fall, in September for next school year. So I think, you know, with this committee, if we're sort of continuing to look at the phases and you know, maybe that can be something we try to nail down at our next meeting, figuring out which phases we feel like we have to have, which phases we can do without. And if we come up with that, then we can reach back out to the companies saying, okay, you know, can you send us a new cost proposal and what a proposal would look like if we eliminate these phases but keep these ones, and you know, potentially make a recommendation to the school committee.
I could just add, this is Kimberly. If I could just add a thought to that, I was thinking that we're in a place where I believe most of us want to move forward unless opinions have changed. I think that would be a piece of information that would be helpful. That if, there's a group consensus that we'd like to move forward with the external at some point. But it seems based on this conversation that most people are interested or in favor, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but in looking internally as well, whether it be to save, on the budget, but most importantly, really to build partnership with our colleagues and your colleagues in particular, right? So what are the needs that students are seeing? What are the needs that teachers and staff are seeing? And Shivali, you mentioned the SIT team. I thought that was incredible, at pulling the data that they're already comfortable looking at. And so I had suggested in the chat, and that maybe there's an ad hoc group here within this Zoom room tonight that has a lens on that data that could work with potentially one or two people on the SIT committees at each school, and that could be a partner in the work. So between now and April, we can start to look at what we have access to, and then we'll be better informed as to what we're going to cut and how we're going to shape this redrafted proposal. So those are just my thoughts.
I gotta go. We'll talk. Thank you. Bye. (6:30)
So I guess I think it's a great idea too to sort of work with schools and SIT teams. I'm just unclear still what exactly we'd be reaching out to them, either asking for, looking for. That's the part that I'm still kind of unsure about. I don't know about anyone else, or if somebody has sort of a clearer idea about that, speak up.
I agree. I just, and being a non-educator, I don't, in when we thought back why we wanted the audit and what our goals were and where we thought, there were issues we wanted to address. I'm unclear how the data from I'm not sure how that data meets that, and how, or I don't know, maybe at the next committee, like we see, I just don't have a good understanding of what the data is that we'd be interpreting, or like the SIT team would be interpreting. So if it's achievement, but we already know that this school is not achieving for whatever reason, I'm unclear how it would fit into the mission of the committee.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it just seems like so there's a decision about whether or not to move forward with examining internal data, which everybody seems to be on board with, or at least that seems to me to be the consensus. But then there's a question about, are we waiting on that process to move forward with the external audit? And I'm still not 100% crystal clear on whether everybody agrees on that. It seems like maybe we're not waiting on that process. And then another question is, how do those things interrelate? Are there certain things that we're moving forward with internally that is going to inform what we recommend for the audit, right? And if so, it seems like that's the next task, right? Like, let's look at what was proposed in the external audit and figure out what can we now do internally that will change what we're going to recommend in terms of the external audit. But that's just what I'm laying out there. I don't know if we all agree on that, or if some people think we need to wait to get the internal data before we move forward with the external, that only that one's going to inform the other, or that they're completely independent. And I don't know how to get sort of the pulse of the group on that, but that seems like, the question.
I guess, for me, I see value in getting the internal data. I certainly think that could, help the buy-in issues that we were talking about and everything. But I also very much see the value, as some have also posted in the chat, of the external perspective and the objective lens, right? And so I guess my question is, if we gather data internally and we're going to analyze it, is that it for that data, or will we eventually share that for an external perspective? when an outside group comes in to do an audit? And then is that even going to save us any money?
So I think when looking at the, sorry, Jake. I think when looking at the phases, and I'm just using what Insight had written up just because they had a little more detail when they broke out their phases, and I have that in front of me. But phase 5 for Insight is that district data analysis, and I'm just going to read it right off of here. Provide a detailed analysis on district data relative to student academic performance, enrollment based on tracking, discipline, achievement, attendance, social emotional needs, dropout and graduation rates, involvement in extracurricular activities, special education, and English learner classification. And it says disaggregate the data by race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, disability, and English language proficiency. To me, everything that I just sort of read there, that is a lot of that data that we can pull internally from those sources that Shivali mentioned. Both a lot of public, resources, but also some things that only teachers and school administrators might be privy to. So, in talking about sort of that process of looking at things internally, I think we could gather a lot of that stuff, bring it back to the subcommittee, look at it, and figure out sort of where we want to go with it from there. While at the same time figuring out which phases from these proposals we really want to move forward with, and then maybe taking a vote, or at least coming to the table next month, each of us sort of saying, these are my absolute phases that, I feel like we should move forward with, these I can do without, and, possibly taking a vote at that point, because that I think at least gives us sort of two things to work on. We can figure out the process of gathering that data and working with SIT teams and working with administrators, but also kind of keeping us moving forward with this equity audit and the RFP. Because we did get these RFPs back in October, November, and now we're here in March, and I'd like to see some movement certainly by the beginning of next school year if we feel like we're timeline wise we can't make it happen before then, and considering this has to go to school committee to be voted on, I get it, it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think that's definitely something we should continue to work on regardless of what we decide to do with the internal data.
Another thought that I had was both companies' phase 1 is sort of the initial kickoff, and again, I'm gonna refer to Insights because theirs is really, really cohesive, and honestly, I can't really find the other one easily, but their phase 1 seems like it almost seems like exactly what we are trying to do, which is I'm just going to read it directly again, like Brian just did. Planning kickoff meeting with the NKSD leadership team to align priorities, establish goals, solidify timeline, develop metrics for success and assessment process. And then part of that phase 1 is also survey NKSD parents, staff, students, and alumni regarding their concerns pertaining to DEI issues, and conduct focus groups with students, families, faculty, staff, principals, central office staff, and community partners, and provide a detailed report on common themes that emerge. It's phase 1 because it's literally the first step. That doesn't seem to include any collection of data other than survey stuff. So I might be inclined to start with a phase 1 on one of these companies, because that's essentially what we're doing right now, is establishing what we want, how we're going to get it, where we want to go with it, and sort of understand the themes that emerge that will then influence phase 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I don't know if it makes sense to, and if the companies would be willing to do that. It's $10,000 for Insight and and $8,200 for PCG just to conduct that first step, that step that seems like we're trying to figure out right now. Again, does that make sense? And again, I don't know if they would commit to doing the first step, not knowing if we would ever move forward with the other steps, or maybe we will, but a portion of the other steps. Because just reading that description is basically everything that we've talked about right today. Just what are your goals? What do you want to get out of this? And surveying the students and staff and parents and faculty and understanding the themes that come out of it.
Jake, I appreciate everything you just shared. I have another thought that I'd like to put on the table. The way that I'm envisioning this is really just to identify what's being measured. Like, what are the specific questions from various survey tools that relate to DEI? And Shivali, I'm going to throw this back to you as well. I'm wondering if this is what you were thinking in terms of these are the data points, these are the indicators that are already being measured. If we as a subcommittee have an understanding of what that looks like, I think it could help us with, a cherry picking maybe what's in the proposal. So that's what I was thinking about. Although I think generally it could inform us what are the needs in the district, because we're going to have an understanding of public data, particularly if it's through RIDE. But connected to that, I think my thoughts were we wouldn't be running focus groups. We wouldn't be looking for any qualitative data necessarily, more of just what is being covered. Those are my thoughts. I don't know what others think, but.
If we did just started with phase one, what would that process even look like from a logistical standpoint between the school committee and us if we decided we wanted another phase, or the school committee and the companies?
Katie, you froze there for a little bit on my end. Can you just repeat that last part?
Sorry. Is this an all or nothing kind of process, or can we continually renegotiate with these companies as we get to each stage? And then with the school committee, what is this process? Normally, when I purchase something and there's negotiating involved, you go back and forth multiple times. Doing it at a institutional level like this is new to me, and I don't know how much room there is for negotiation.
I agree with Katie's point, and it seems there are a lot of negotiations, and the one word that's coming to my mind truly is trust, because we have an external vendor coming in that will be speaking to families, engaging with the community, and then all of a sudden we stop the process and they're no longer here. So I think about the public impact of that stop and go process.
Yeah, I think I would. I definitely agree. Phase one should be included in whatever we're moving forward with, or what we propose to the school committee. But I think I would rather come to the school committee with sort of a full proposal saying, we want these phases. We think that these are important, and this is the DEI subcommittee proposal, rather than sort of saying we want to start with phase one and then down the road maybe do more, maybe not. I also just don't know if that. I mean, we just made the full proposal last time, and that got sent back to us. I could see them not voting on us doing just phase one and sort of leaving everything else up in the air. So I do think we should probably, at some point, and it's not going to be tonight, obviously, come to a consensus of these are the phases that we'd like to recommend, send that to the school committee and see what they say. But I do think it should sort of be a full proposal.
I agree.
Just
go ahead.
Suggest that next meeting, at least for me, it would be helpful if someone some smaller group of people, maybe those who know our internal data well, could come, and I think Kimberly was suggesting something like this via chat, rather than us all sort of come with our own ideas about, these different stages. Like if there's a group of people that come and say, hey, we have the internal data that can address phases X and Y, but we should retain these other phases, and we start with the proposal and then we move from there. We move from there with people saying, nope, I think we should scale back further. Nope, I think we should also include that, rather than sort of like we all come with our own. Because I just feel not informed enough to be able to do that. But I think there's probably a group of us who could come and say, hey, we have internal data that can hit this, but the rest of it we need, and then we work from there. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, I agree, and I deserve that for not formulating a thought entirely before vocalizing it. But I don't think we should come to the rest of the school committee with little bits and pieces.
So, Dave, to address your point, I guess my thought with that is, I think we have, outside of the focus groups and survey questions, programming and policy review, financial resources. I mean, we do have all that information. We have our school committee policies. We have all of our financial data, but I think my thought with the outside company is they would be the one assessing it and looking at it from a DEI lens and sort of making recommendations from there. So I think, you look at any of these, certainly curriculum review, that's one where, we have our curriculum, and that's sort of its own process. But I guess sort of addressing your question, I think for me, it's getting back to that phase 5 of that student data review. Everything that's included in there, that is definitely things that we can pull and, look at and maybe analyze ourselves and maybe come to some conclusions. But I wouldn't know where to begin in terms of, from a diversity or equity standpoint, looking at the financial resources. I mean, we could kind of do that, but I certainly don't have the expertise sort of in that area,
So it sounds like you're proposing, Brian, that if we cut phase 5, we should recommend everything else.
I think I'm definitely suggesting cutting phase 5, but I'm not necessarily recommending everything else. I don't know that a curriculum review is necessary, especially when it's sort of a larger process. If we did have a curriculum review and they came back and said, your English curriculum isn't, or they made recommendations about changing it, that's not an easy process. I mean, our curriculum has to be approved by RIDE. Our middle schools and elementary schools have just gone through English curriculum process where they've selected vendors, they've done pilots, they've come back to the table to figure out which one they wanted to move forward with. So my concern, in particular with the curriculum review too, is sort of, this is the wrong term, but sort of a slap in the face to our teachers and educators who have taken on so much of that work over the last couple of years. And, I can speak specifically for the middle schools because I was, principal 2 years ago when they went through that pilot process, and it's a ton of work that they did. So I guess, specifically about curriculum, if an outside company came in and said that they had recommendations for changing our curriculum, we could certainly look at that, but that is such a larger process, and whereas I think if they were focusing on focus groups, surveys, community engagement, that would give us a lot of things that we could sort of look at and figure out how we might want to approach that moving forward in this committee.
Yeah, this is helpful. I think just maybe if we can narrow down the phases that we're debating. Right, so we're to go in instead of say like, well, these are we all can agree that we want these things, and we can all agree that we should cut phase 5 because we have the data for that. And so next meeting is just a matter of do we keep the curriculum in there? Do we keep this other phase in there? And and we know which ones we're tackling going into that meeting. That I think that would be helpful.
I think that's a great task for the upcoming month is to just sit down and look at these in more detail and come up with those conclusions on our own, and literally at the next meeting go down and say, all right, what do we think about phase 2? What do we think about phase 3? And or how we can amend it.
I wonder if we could reach out to the companies from which we purchased the curricula to ask them what they did to prepare for, certainly the company for the ELA curriculum certainly would have done their due diligence to make sure that it was diverse and equitable and inclusive. Maybe they would have a report on that they would or could provide to us about how they developed theirs.
That's an awesome question.
And yeah, Dave, to answer that, we can reach out to them. We just had a couple questions about the timeline and pricing last time. Both of them were very responsive and certainly said, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. I didn't capture all that. Dave, would you mind emailing me sort of that thought that you had, and we can try to get some information, and then we can bring that back to next month's meeting. So I think, and I don't think there needs to be a motion made for this, but I think what I'm hearing is, if all of us can kind of review the phases sort of in depth between now and our next meeting, which is on April 13th, so we can really have a good discussion and like Jake said, maybe even just go down phase by phase and sort of take a vote about what we feel like we should include and what we shouldn't, with the goal of being able to make a recommendation to the school committee following that April 13th meeting. I know school committee has an April 12th meeting, and then I think April 26th, I believe.
26th.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe with the goal of being able to come up with a amended proposal that we can send to the school committee for April 26th. And I'm sure if we have an idea, or if we can come to a conclusion at our meeting on April 13th, before the agenda needs to be set for school committee, we could get updated pricing for both companies and move forward that way. And like I said, I don't think we need to make a proposal. I think that's, just this agenda item will just sort of be tabled until next time. And but that's sort of the task for everyone, to really look into each phase, figure out, which ones we really want to move forward with, or you personally, and then we'll sort of have a discussion about it next month.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Any other last comments or anything else to say about that? I know we're running out of time, so I don't know that we'll get to everything on the agenda, but we can try to move forward from here. Okay. The next agenda item was number 4, discuss and, sorry, I'm just letting Dave back in. Next agenda item, discuss and possibly draft a statement recommending the full school committee actively recruit BIPOC educators for 1, the open administrative positions, and 2, for any other staffing needs. And I know Jen did have to hop off for another meeting, but she had sent me previously, she just had some notes, I think just sort of speaking to this, and I'll ask her if she did include some links. I just think it's either to articles or some research. The importance of hiring and retaining BIPOC teachers, why representation matters to BIPOC teachers and their students, and why do schools need to hire racially diverse teaching staff. So I'll see if she can share those links with everyone, and we can certainly add that to the meeting minutes. And then I'll just read off, she just included some other findings I think that she probably wanted to speak to. So I'm just going to read what she had on her notes in regards to this. Recent reports from Brookings, REL Northwest, and the Center for American Progress demonstrate that students of color recognize benefits from having a teacher of the same race, including better performance in standardized tests, higher attendance rates, lower rates of disciplinary issues, better chances of completing high school, and better chances of pursuing higher education. There is also evidence that white students benefit from having a racially and ethnically diverse teaching staff by becoming exposed to new perspectives, realizing an increased sense of civic engagement, developing better problem solving and critical thinking skills, and expanding their range of creativity and social and emotional learning skills. And then the last part that she had here was how can school districts and schools attract more teachers of color? Partner with local colleges and universities, partner with historically Black colleges and universities and multilingual higher education institutes, use data to inform recruitment marketing strategies, partner with alternative teacher preparation programs, leverage relationships with informal connectors, and develop early outreach programs. So like I said, those were notes that I know Jen included, and she had put this agenda item on, so I'm sure she would have more to say about that. I don't know if anyone else wants to make a comment or add anything. Obviously, we're not going to be able to draft a statement tonight considering the time, but I certainly think this is something important. And, coming from my standpoint as the HR director, and like Marissa said, vast majority of our staff are white. We don't have a racially diverse staff, and looking at maybe some of these strategies or certainly making a statement, I think is something that we can do. But if anyone else has any comments or thoughts about any of that.
Again, I think it would be really helpful to know about retention, right? Is this a place that someone who could bring those diverse perspectives would even want to teach or stay here long term? Is the support in place for that person? It's fine to recruit, but if we're not prepared to support the work that those people are doing, which is going to be additional work beyond what other teachers are going to have to do and other staff are going to have to do, we would be doing them a disservice and possible harm to them and the students.
I think,
Thanks,
Brian.
Amy. I think that's a great point. Sorry, Melissa, go ahead.
Sorry, just it would be helpful to know, again, I apologize for my ignorance of just what is the process for hiring in general, and if there are things that we could look at. I imagine this is on the somewhere in one of the phases for the external folks, but could we also look at what our current practice is, and are they, are we advertising in places where the candidates that we would hope would be interested are looking, simple things like that. That we could identify now early. And so I have a thing with statements, and it kind of relates to the next agenda item too, of like, I'm tired of the words, what are we going to do? And so there are some actions we can probably engage in right now in trying to identify what our current practice is and how can we make them more equitable.
I can speak briefly to that, for education in particular, School Spring is really the job posting website that we use almost exclusively. Certain positions where people might not be as inclined to look on School Spring will post ads in Projo on ZipRecruiter. But beyond that, since I've been in this chair as the HR director, we haven't done much else. I think it's just sort of the nature of education, I guess. With School Spring, if you're an educator, to go to School Spring, look for positions, and that's where things will be posted. The majority of school districts, certainly in Rhode Island and elsewhere, utilize School Spring, and it's been around for a while. I have some issues with School Spring. I don't love it, but it's also where most people post and most people go to look. So sort of has a monopoly, so to speak, on the job posting market for education positions. But that's really what we've done so far. The other piece that's difficult too is, in terms of local universities and colleges, that's certainly something that we could do. It's tough to predict what open positions you're going to have each year or how many. We have our internal job fair assignment at the end of each school year. That sort of gives internal candidates first crack at any open positions. So until that happens, we typically don't know exactly what's going to be open until mid to late June. Those positions get posted on School Spring, and we try to fill them as quickly as possible because just about every other school district is doing the same thing at the same time. But that's not to say that, we can't partner with local colleges or universities and at least promote North Kingstown as a school department and a district that we want people to come to. And I think maybe that's something that, we can look at increasing, because that's something we have not done, like I said, since I've been here. Any other comments on that? I know it just turned 7 o'clock, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time. What I'll do is I'm going to ask that this agenda item and also the next one that we didn't get to, formal statement of support, be taken up next month on the 13th, in addition to reviewing those proposals for the equity audit as well. So, I think, like I said before, if everyone can really take a look at, the proposals, the phases, and come to the table next month, I think that'll be sort of our first order of business, and hopefully we can kind of come to a consensus about what we want to move forward to the school committee and go from there. And if we can get through that discussion quickly, hopefully we can make some headway on these other issues as well, or these other agenda items. All right, unless there's anything else, I think I'll make a motion to end this meeting. Oh, and just so you know, next meeting, April 13th, 5:30. The executive order for that allows us to do public meetings through Zoom is actually ending on Friday or Saturday, the 19th. I don't expect that to be renewed, just with the way things have been going. So assuming it's not, we will be in person, and that's going to be at the central admin building. In the conference room there. So that'll be all included on the agenda that we send out before the 13th, but just so you guys are aware, it will most likely not be available for Zoom, so we'll have to be in person starting the 13th of April.
I also think in-person meetings will help move it along a little bit faster. There tends to be like lots of Zoom dead silence for a long time. So I think we perhaps might be able to accomplish a little bit more, or move it along a little bit faster in person. So I think that's a good thing.
Yep, I agree. All right, unless anyone has anything else, I am going to make a motion to end our meeting tonight.
So moved.
Second from Jake. All in favor? Okay, passes. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.